Now let's take a minute to talk about the role that genetics play in personalizing your diet. Your genetics are the cornerstone of your health. When it comes to personalizing a diet that is right for you, genetics and physical makeup are, of course, the foundation. We can't transcend our genetics, but we can make tweaks to the diet and lifestyle that can potentially make a huge difference in the long run. I hear people say things like, well, my father died of cancer, so I'll probably die of the same thing. Is it the case that the fate of our health is totally genetically predetermined? Are we doomed to suffer from the same diseases as our parents and grandparents? It might reassure you to know that current estimates of your genetic predisposition to most forms of cancer is only about 5 to 10%. And also, current research indicates that about 30% of the risk for developing any autoimmune disease is due to hereditary factors. It seems that what has to happen in order to manifest these conditions in the body is there must be some kind of environmental trigger, something that subjects a person to an overwhelming amount of stress. A neurologist friend of mine likes to call this the double hit hypothesis. In other words, for many destructive health conditions, a genetic predisposition must first exist, and then it must be turned on by an environmental trigger. So if my chances of getting a particular type of cancer or developing a specific autoimmune condition is only 5% and 30% genetically predetermined, then what can I do to avoid turning on these genes? And this question is also important. If those disease genes do get turned on, how do I turn them off? This is where the power of your diet and lifestyle choices really come into focus. In many cases, there is actually a lot that you can do to navigate yourself back to health, but it requires consistent effort and a lot of investment in personalizing a diet and lifestyle that fits you best. Let me give you a couple of examples of people from around the world whose diets are very personalized, mostly based on where they live. The example of the Inuit people's diet is particularly cool in my opinion. From studying their genetic makeup, we have learned that your genetic heritage really does make a difference in your body's ability to metabolize certain foods. At the genetic level, any two people are more than 99% the same. The variations that exist between people can be very small, but these variations may underlie the differences in susceptibility to disease, response to drugs, or reaction to environmental factors. Researchers decided to study the diets of the Inuit natives of Greenland who live in extremely cold conditions that can hover in the negative digits in the winter. Although their ancestors arrived in Greenland less than 1,000 years ago, they lived for thousands of years before that under similar conditions in the Arctic. They eat a specialized diet, including seals and whales. The diet is rich in protein and omega-3 polyunsaturated fatty acids. The Inuit people have always eaten their meat and fat raw, frozen, thawed out, dried, aged, or cached, which means slightly aged, and they have done this for thousands of years. This is a tradition that still carries on through today. The natives believe that raw meat will keep the hunter energized and mobile to do his chores effectively and productively. And this seems to make sense as raw meat contains more vitamins and enzymes to help metabolize the meat. Compared with people of European and Chinese ancestry, the Inuits seem to have a unique genetic makeup, specifically in a cluster of genes that code for proteins that help process dietary fatty acids. This genetic variation that allows the Inuits to efficiently process meat and fat as their primary energy source is rare in humans. Only about 2% of the Europeans and 16% of the Han Chinese had it. On top of that, it was discovered that the Inuit people's body are more efficient at heat production in response to cold exposure. The Inuit people were also found to have other unique physiological characteristics as well, such as lower height and weight, and lower levels of fasting insulin and LDL cholesterol, which could potentially protect against heart disease and diabetes. What this means for the Inuit people on a very practical level is that their bodies are highly adapted to consuming animal foods in their native environment. However, these are, by definition, very specialized genetics. This is the opposite of metabolic flexibility. What I mean by that is if an Inuit person moved from Greenland to Puerto Rico, their body would struggle a great deal to survive in the hot temperatures and with the more carbohydrate-rich diet. Because the Inuit people have unique genetic adaptations to a high-fat, high-animal protein diet, it isn't necessarily reasonable to extrapolate health data from them to other populations. A diet that is healthy for the Inuit may not necessarily be good for other populations. but it does go a long way in showing us how incredibly adaptable the human body can be. When faced with a harsh environment and enough time to adapt, the human genome could reshape itself to live up to the challenge. Contrast the Inuit diet with the diet of the Kitavan people of Melanesia. Kitavans eat a very high carbohydrate diet with about 69% of overall calories coming from carbohydrates. They also consume plenty of saturated fat and little protein, and they appear to thrive on this diet without becoming obese or developing a high incidence of metabolic syndrome. The people of the island are largely traditional farmers, and the staples of their diet are sweet potato, taro, yam, cassava, coconut, guava, pineapple, and other tropical fruits, as well as fresh fish. You may notice that grains are not a staple food here. Also, their diet has not been influenced in any way by the modern Western diet and does not involve any dairy products, coffee, tea, or alcohol. Their consumption of salt, oil, sugar, and cereal is negligible. In fact, Western food makes up less than 1% of the Kitavan diet. Despite the fact that most are involved in farming, their level of activity is only a little higher than activity levels in the Western populations. Moreover, about 80% of the inhabitants smoke regularly, and a large number chew betel nut, which is a stimulant that is associated with increased rates of oral cancer in most populations. It is believed that Kitavans don't experience the expected high rates of oral cancer as other countries because of the protective nature of their nutrient-dense traditional diet and lifestyle. So I have just given two examples of relatively healthy populations who are thriving on completely different diets. One is a high carbohydrate diet and one is high fat. The disease and early death rates in these populations is staggeringly low. I wanted to bring these two examples to your attention because there is so much mixed messaging in the field of nutrition. You may have heard that a high protein or a high fat diet is really bad for you. You may have heard that a high carbohydrate diet is really bad for you. But according to a lot of the current scientific evidence, the most unhealthy diets are the ones that are the most disconnected from nature. When your food is highly processed and preserved in order to maintain its condition on a shelf, it has undergone disturbing changes from its original and natural form. What we know from nutritional studies is that when we take care of the earth, we can trust the food that comes from it. And regardless of its macronutrient composition, the human genome can adapt over time to work with whatever the natural environment provides. With that being said, this is where we want to take a step back and think about how we feel and how our bodies respond when we eat different types of foods. For example, do grains make you feel heavy or achy? Does meat make you feel sluggish or tired? Does fruit make your body gain weight over time? Let me give you a personal example to illustrate this point. In 2016 to 2017, I lived in Hawaii for about 9 months. The picture on the far left is me with my parents at a botanical garden when they came to visit me on the Big Island of Hawaii. At that time, my diet was relatively similar to the traditional Kitavan diet, maybe with the exception of a few additional foods on occasion like white rice. I consumed a lot of fresh fruits like coconut, pineapple, avocado, oranges, guava, starfruit, mango, papaya, grapefruit, banana, and pretty much every other type of fruit you can imagine. I also ate lots of sweet potatoes, taro or poi as the locals called it, and poke, a type of locally caught fish. During the time I was there, I was very active working mostly on permaculture farms, and even though I was eating a whole foods, mostly plant-based diet, my genetics are simply not compatible with that specific diet. My body is just simply not as efficient with fruits, and as a result, I tend to gain weight when I eat too many of them. I gained about 15 pounds in just a few months. So let this serve as an example about how any specific diet may be healthy and ideal for some, while not the best possible diet for someone else. There is one more topic that I would like to briefly mention while we are still on the subject of how your individual genetic makeup can possibly determine which foods are healthiest for you to consume on a regular basis. It's a topic that has been widely discussed by nutritionists for the past 3 decades, and that is the topic of eating according to your blood type. In 1996, Dr. Peter Diadamo, a naturopathic physician, published a book that encouraged people to eat a particular diet according to what type of blood they have. If you are interested in how your blood type might impact your diet, then check out the bonus video and food list for each blood type in this week's course materials.